Hi, my dear listeners. Before we dive into today's story, I want to thank three incredible women whose comments truly meant a lot to me. Olivia Harris from Eugene, Oregon, Danielle Foster from Roanoke, Virginia, and Melissa Grant from Naperville, Illinois. It's so special to have you here and to see how far these stories are traveling. And before we continue, please subscribe to the channel, because YouTube often doesn't show the ending of the video to those who aren't subscribed. Now tell me, where are you listening from today? Sarah hurried through the relentless downpour that blanketed the parking lot outside a bustling Chicago office complex, her carefully chosen heels splashing through puddles that had formed in the uneven asphalt. She had been running late for an important audition after a long day of temp work, and her rideshare app showed the car waiting nearby. Yanking open the rear door of the sleek black sedan, she tumbled inside, chest heaving as cold water dripped from her coat onto the soft leather seats. "Thank goodness," she breathed, pushing damp strands of hair from her forehead. "The Chicago Theater on Randolph, please. I'm already cutting it close." Silence answered her. Sarah glanced up and met the startled gaze of the driver reflected in the rearview mirror. Intense green eyes framed by a sharply tailored suit, his hand paused on his tie. The interior smelled faintly of cedar cologne and fresh coffee. Nothing like the usual rideshare scents of air, freshener and old takeout. A small booster seat sat beside her, topped with a worn stuffed dinosaur whose scales felt slightly fuzzy under her fingertips. "Oh no," Sarah stammered, her face flushing hot despite the chill clinging to her skin. "I thought this was my car. I'm so sorry." She reached for the door handle, embarrassment tightening her throat like an invisible band. The man turned slightly, his voice low and steady. "You're drenched, and this storm isn't letting up anytime soon." He checked his watch briefly. "Randolph Street? I'm heading that way for a meeting. I can drop you off if you'd like." Sarah hesitated, her mother's old cautions about strangers whispering in her mind like a distant warning bell. Yet something in the way his shoulders relaxed, the subtle kindness softening the corners of his eyes, made her pause. The rain hammered harder against the windows, turning the world outside into a gray blur. "I'm Sarah," she offered quietly. "Sarah Thompson. And I promise, I don't usually climb into strange cars." "Robert Ellis," he replied, extending his hand over the seat. His palm was warm against her cold fingers, sending an unexpected spark through her. "And I don't usually offer rides to strangers in parking lots. But exceptions happen." As Robert eased the car into traffic, Sarah watched the city lights streak past, blurred by raindrops racing down the glass. Neither of them could have guessed that this simple mix-up would unravel the careful paths they had, each been walking alone, leading them toward something neither had dared hope for anymore. The audition at the historic Chicago Theater unfolded like a slow-motion unraveling of her dreams. Sarah's sheet music had absorbed too much water, the ink bleeding into illegible smears, and her voice faltered under the weight of soaked clothes and shattered confidence. The director barely lifted his eyes from his tablet, waving her off midway through her song with a curt, "Thank you, next." Standing beneath the theater's awning afterward, watching the rain continue its assault on the streets, Sarah felt the familiar sting of defeat settle deep in her chest. 6 auditions in the past month, each one chipping away at the hope that had brought her to Chicago years ago. Her savings were dwindling. Rent notices loomed, and her roommate had started dropping hints about finding someone more reliable to share the apartment. A familiar black sedan glided to the curb. Robert rolled down the passenger window. "Need a lift home? The storm's only getting worse." Sarah blinked through the downpour. "You waited?" "I had some calls to make. Thought I'd see if you needed help getting back." His eyes scanned her face gently. "Didn't go as planned?" "That obvious?" She slid into the warm car, the heater's breath chasing away the cold that had seeped into her bones. They ended up at a cozy neighborhood diner tucked away on a quiet Chicago side street, the kind of place with red-checked tablecloths and waitresses who remembered regulars' orders. The aroma of melted cheese and fresh coffee wrapped around them like a comforting embrace. Over plates of rich macaroni and cheese that tasted like pure solace, Sarah found herself opening up more than she had in years. She spoke of her longing to perform, the string of closed doors, the growing fear that she might have to admit defeat and return to her quiet Midwest hometown. "What about you?" she asked finally, realizing she dominated the conversation. "You mentioned calls earlier. What keeps you busy?" "I run a software company focused on educational tools for kids with learning challenges," Robert said modestly. His fingers traced the rim of his coffee mug, revealing faint calluses that spoke of hands-on work, despite the executive suit. "My son Ethan struggles with dyslexia. He's 7 now, bright, curious, but reading brings him so much frustration. I started the company for him." The vulnerability in his voice touched, something raw inside Sarah. "That sounds meaningful. Not many people turn personal pain into something that helps others." Robert's jaw tightened briefly, a flicker of old bitterness crossing his features before he caught himself. "His mother left when he was small. Said she couldn't handle the extra needs. We've managed, but it's left its marks." He met her eyes, the silence between them heavy with unspoken understanding. "I don't usually share that. Something about rainy nights and wrong cars, I guess." Sarah smiled softly, her hand brushing his across the table for a moment. The touch lingered like warmth after frost. Must be the weather loosening tongues. 3 days later, an unexpected call came while Sarah was sorting through rejection emails. The voice on the line belonged to a woman from Robert's company. "Mr. Ellis suggested we reach out. We're developing new interactive learning characters and need voice talent. He thought your background might be perfect." Sarah's heart raced as she sat in the sleek downtown office building later that afternoon, reading lines into a microphone for animated guides designed to make reading feel like play rather than struggle. The script sparkled with clever humor and gentle encouragement, far from the dry materials she'd imagined. When she finished the final page, she looked up to see Robert observing through the glass, a small boy with matching green eyes standing beside him, watching with wide curiosity. That captured exactly what we wanted, the engineer said warmly. "We'd love you for all the characters if you're open to it." Afterward, in the hallway, Robert introduced his son. "You sound different," Ethan said bluntly, tilting his head. Robert started to correct him, but Sarah laughed, the sound lightening the air. "That was pretend voices. Want to hear how I really sound?" She switched to her natural tone, then added a silly dragon growl that sent Ethan into giggles, his small hands clapping with delight. "Can she come read my books like that?" Ethan asked his father eagerly. Robert looked apologetic. "Ethan, Miss Thompson is busy." "I'd actually love to," Sarah said, surprising herself with the sincerity that bloomed in her chest. What started as voice sessions gradually wove itself into her daily life. Sarah's theater training helped her craft lessons that turned reading struggles into adventures full of rhythm and emotion. She spent evenings at their comfortable Lincoln Park apartment, sitting cross-legged on the floor with Ethan as he sounded out words, his face lighting up when he succeeded. The warmth of his small hand in hers during tricky passages melted something frozen inside her, the belief that her talents had no place outside spotlights. Robert observed these moments with quiet intensity, his eyes softening each time Ethan conquered a sentence without tears. One night after the boy had gone to sleep, Robert poured 2 glasses of deep red wine in the softly lit living room. The scent of oak and berries mingled with the faint aroma of Ethan's bedtime shampoo still lingering in the air. "You've brought light into his world," Robert said, his voice rough with emotion. 6 months ago, Bedtime reading ended in frustration and hiding under covers. Now he begs for extra pages. His fingers brushed hers as he handed her the glass, sending heat racing up her arm like a slow-burning fire. Sarah felt her breath catch. He's done the same for me. I came to Chicago chasing applause and crowds. But watching him light up when he reads, that feels deeper than any stage ovation. Robert set his glass down carefully. Sarah, Ethan's small voice called from upstairs for a drink of water, breaking the moment. Robert smiled ruefully. The glamorous single-parent life. Go ahead, Sarah whispered. I should get home. At the door, Robert paused, his hand resting lightly on her arm, the fabric warm from his touch. Would you like to have dinner sometime? Just us? Her heart skipped. I'd like that. Very much. Their first real date took place at a rooftop restaurant with sweeping views of Lake Michigan glittering under city lights. Robert seemed uncharacteristically nervous, adjusting his cufflinks repeatedly as they waited for appetizers. The cool evening breeze carried the distant sound of waves and traffic, contrasting the warmth growing between them. I haven't done this in years, he admitted, his eyes meeting hers with raw honesty. Neither have I, Sarah confessed. My last relationship fell apart because I poured everything into auditions. It left me questioning if I was enough. That's not true, Robert said firmly, reaching across the table. His thumb traced gentle circles on her hand, the sensation sending sparks through her veins. Your passion is what makes you remarkable. Under these stars, talking about our pasts and fears, I see that clearly. They spoke for hours about childhood memories, hidden dreams, and the weight of responsibilities. Robert shared his terror of failing Ethan as both parents. Sarah opened up about the ice of self-doubt that had crept in after repeated rejections. The words hung between them, heavy yet freeing, like releasing long-held breath. I'm falling for you, Robert said suddenly, his voice catching. You and Ethan both. But it scares me. What if I disappoint you? Sarah squeezed his hand, vulnerability making her own voice tremble. I'm falling too, and that terrifies me just as much. Months unfolded like pages in a story neither had planned to write. Sarah joined the company full-time, her creative programs gaining recognition for transforming how children approached learning. She moved gradually into their lives, her presence filling the apartment with laughter and hand-drawn pictures from Ethan taped to the fridge. They built routines, family dinners, park walks along the lakefront, quiet evenings where silences spoke volumes of comfort. One crisp evening in Lincoln Park, with leaves turning gold around them, Ethan ran ahead toward the playground while Sarah and Robert walked hand in hand. The air carried the earthy scent of autumn and distant lake water. Do you ever wonder about that rainy day? Robert asked quietly. Getting into the wrong car? Sarah stopped, turning to face him. The wind tugged at her hair, but his eyes held steady warmth. It was exactly the right car. I just hadn't realized it yet. Robert reached into his pocket, pulling out a small, velvet box. He dropped to one knee, his hands steady despite the emotion tightening his jaw. There's no perfect moment, only us finding our way together. You, me, and Ethan. Sarah Thompson, will you marry me? Tears blurred her vision as she nodded. Yes, she whispered, the word repeating like a promise. Yes. Ethan came running back, bouncing with excitement he could barely contain. Did she say yes? Dad asked me first if it was okay for you to be my mom. I said yes right away. Sarah knelt, to his level, pulling him close, feeling Robert's arms wrap around them both. The weight of past loneliness lifted like ice melting under spring sun. In that embrace, she understood that true belonging wasn't about grand stages or perfect plans, but in the quiet surrender to love that arrived disguised as accident. 8 months later, on a bright Chicago morning, Sarah watched from their sunlit kitchen as Ethan proudly read aloud from his favorite book during breakfast, his voice steady and full of pride. Robert stood behind her, his arms circling her waist, chin resting gently on her shoulder. The simple gold band on her finger caught the light, a constant reminder of the path that had led them here. Their family had grown not just in numbers, but in the deep roots of trust and shared vulnerability that turned ordinary days into something extraordinary. The warmth of Robert's breath against her neck whispered promises of more mornings like this, more laughter echoing through the rooms, more moments where love revealed itself as the strongest force of all. Sometimes the detours life forced upon us weren't mistakes at all. They were quiet invitations to the places our hearts had been searching for without knowing it.